All right, so thank you both for sitting down with us here for this video interview at the GC&E Summit. The first question I wanted to ask you both is, following up on your presentation this morning, is, where do you think many organizations go wrong when they set out to begin their risk assessment?
I'll go first.
Please.
I think it all comes down to scope. A lot of times, and I mentioned this during the presentation, you have to define a scope and hold on to it very tightly, because a lot of times that scope creep can set in, and before you know it, you've got a vulnerability assessment that is way beyond what you'd anticipated at first.
And then from my standpoint is I lean towards the stakeholder involvement side, is that when we don't get the right people, when we're not given access to the right people, we can essentially go off on a tangent that isn't really in the direction of where we need to be when we're finished with the project. So it's something that we fight to try to figure out who those correct stakeholders are.
Another thing that both of you touched on this morning was that pushback that you get oftentimes from management and stakeholders regarding different recommendations and things along those lines. So when it comes to that, where do you find the greatest pushback from both a technical and a management perspective?
I think the first one is anything that is going to be expensive automatically gets the attention of the executive suite. Another thing that I find on the process side is anything that could potentially be misinterpreted by the employees, and you'd be amazed. Sometimes it's a workplace violence program that an executive doesn't want to put in place because they're afraid it's going to scare the employees. And what they really need to be afraid of is workplace violence, not the program.
Sure, and then from our standpoint, it used to be that we'd get a lot of pushback from IT and a lot of hesitancy, but things are getting better. I mean, the idea of converged networks being able to handle the electronic security systems on the network we're getting closer and closer. So we're not really seeing as much pushback, but in the past that was the issues we were dealing with.
And then one more thing on that, George had mentioned the stakeholder involvement, and our presentation is very heavy in stakeholder involvement. And setting those expectations at the beginning can head off a lot of that pushback whenever you actually do present your recommendations, because now they're not a surprise. It's something that everybody kind of saw coming. And if you agree on the front end, it's much harder to disagree on the back end.
And once the assessment's done and you're sitting down with management and stakeholders, what are the keys to properly carrying out and implementing the recommendations from the assessment?
I mean, and this is something we've kind of developed together. It's making sure that the way the recommendations are delivered, that it's stewardable, that it kind of becomes almost like a metric, that you define things as long-term, medium-term, short-term, and then high priority, medium priority, low priority. And you can also break that out into whether it's construction or process, what the likely expense is going to be. And so you give them a means of stewarding that. And that becomes a way that this is a master plan that they can use for years to come.
Sure, and that's the way we see it. We see it as a master plan that they can use for years to come. So often we phase it, we develop probable costs that go along with the recommendations, so that they can really understand, how to get this thing completed with little bites. So